Hello Year 8 and welcome to your lesson on the climate of Africa. Last week we were looking at climate graphs and we were identifying that all around Africa there are different places that have much higher rainfall than others, and also we looked at places that have much higher temperatures than others. So in this lesson we are going to be describing the climate in Africa. So we're going to be focusing on the amount of rainfall that parts of Africa receive and also whether the temperature changes regardless of where you are in Africa. And then we're going to explain reasons for this. So why parts of Africa are hot and wet and why parts of Africa are hot and dry. So the purpose of this video is to go through tasks 2, 3 and 4 in a little bit more detail, and hopefully that will allow you to answer them more confidently. So the first thing that we need to do is describe the rainfall in Africa. And when we're describing rainfall or any type of figure, we need to try and use the writing frame T. So T stands for trend, E stands for evidence, and A stands for anomaly, or sometimes known as an outlier. So what we're going to do first, we're going to do this example together, and then you're going to do the other one on your own. So what's the trend? Is there a trend when looking at rainfall where it's very clear that near the equator, so with my darker line, I am going to draw on where the equator would be. So this yellow line is showing where the equator is. And you can see that either side of the equator, we have a significant amount of rainfall, up to 2,000 millimeters of rainfall per year. Whereas as we move towards the tropics, so we've got the Tropic of Cancer here and the Tropic of Capricorn here, you can see that the amount of rainfall starts to reduce. Okay, so let's try and write a trend for this. It might be worth saying something that areas closer to the equator have more rainfall and areas closer to the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn have less rainfall. Okay, so let's back this up with evidence. Well, first of all, we need to make reference to the names of places, and we also need to make reference to the key. So we might start to say things like, for example, and I'm going to refer to this country here, which is DROC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. In DROC, average rainfall is plus 2,000 millimeters. And you might want to talk about other places such as Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Uganda. Now, are there any anomalies? Are there any places that have a very high amount of rainfall that maybe aren't found along the equator? Well, I can see one here, Madagascar. So Madagascar might be our anomaly. So then you would write your anomaly saying a country that doesn't fit the pattern is Madagascar. And the reason that it doesn't fit the pattern is because it's really far away from the equator. However, its rainfall is still roughly 2,000 millimeters of rainfall every year. So this would be our anomaly. Then you would do the same thing talking about areas that have very, very little rainfall. So you talk about those areas closer to the tropics, so places like Mali, Niger, Chad. And then you'd also talk about places in southern Africa, in places like Namibia, South Africa and Botswana. And then you'd talk about anomalies. So an anomaly might be Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, which have very high levels of rainfall, very low levels of rainfall, sorry, but they are also found along the equator. Then you do the same thing for temperatures. Now you'll notice that the temperatures is a little bit different because they generally all fall between these 15 to 30 degree radius, and that is because Africa falls right along the equator and also the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, which is where the sun's rays are the most concentrated. So generally we shouldn't see much of a change in terms of the temperatures, but you can see in places like South Africa and also in your Northern Africa there are areas where it is a little bit cooler, so you might want to use those as your anomalies and then try and make reference to the key and also name some places when doing your trend, evidence and anomaly for this. Okay, now we need to look at why we see these changes. So first of all, where do we find deserts? Well, we can see here we've got the Sahara Desert found along this Tropic of Cancer, which is where we have areas of high pressure. And we're going to come back to this word later. Here we also have the Kalahari Desert, which is also an area of high pressure. And you can see along the equator there aren't any deserts. Now remember that a desert has very, very low levels of rainfall, but is also very, very hot. Now let's compare to this. So where a tropical rainforest found? Well, we can see here within Africa that there is a tropical rainforest found along the equator. And remember that tropical rainforests have very, very high levels of rainfall and they're also very hot. So that is because along the equator we have an area of low pressure. So we need to know what these terms high pressure and low pressure mean. And this will allow you to access and confidently answer the tasks from task 4. Okay then, so let's have a little look at this. So we can see here that these green parts along the equator are showing us tropical rainforests, whereas the yellow parts near the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are showing us deserts. So the sun's rays are more concentrated here, which means that it's hotter. However, the further away you move from the equator, the colder it is, so the temperatures will drop. It rains a lot here, and the reason it rains a lot along the equator is because the sun's rays are so warm there that warm air rises. So think about when you're in a bath, or if you're boiling a kettle or making pasta, that warm air rises, and as it rises it cools and condenses and makes rain. Okay. Now, the further away we move from the equator, we find the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, in these areas, the air is sinking, and the reason that the air sinks is because once it's rained, the air moves either north of the equator or south of the equator, and because it's cold, not because it's cold, as the clouds have lost all of their rain along the equator, then when they move north and south, they sink. Now, as air sinks, it starts to warm up because it's moving closer to the surface of the ground, which means that it won't be able to cool and condense. So that is why we find deserts along the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So let's have a look more carefully at this map here. So we can see along the equator we have very high levels of rainfall, and as we look at the Tropic of Cancer here and the Tropic of Capricorn here, the temperatures are the same, but the levels of rainfall have significantly declined. And this is why. So my red pen is going to show hot air rising and my blue pen is going to show cold air sinking. So we can see warm, moist air as a result of the sun heating the ground rises. So warm air rises. Now, as it rises, it starts to cool and condense. So it cools and condenses and makes clouds. Now, when those clouds get too full, it will start to rain. So that is why we have high levels of rain along the equator. And this is known as low pressure. So there isn't a lot of pressure, so the air is able to rise. As it rises, it cools and condenses and makes clouds, which then rain. Now, once those clouds aren't as heavy anymore, they move either north of the equator or south of the equator towards the tropics. Now, if they move north of the equator, they move towards the Tropic of Cancer, and if they move south of the equator, they move towards the Tropic of Capricorn. And then what happens is that air starts to sink. Now, as it sinks, you'll notice that my arrow changes colour. And the reason that it changes colour is because as we move closer to the equator, as we move closer to the ground, to the surface of Earth, the temperatures warms up. So this cool, dry air sinks or descends, and then it gets warmer. Now, as it gets warmer, it's not able to cool and condense and evaporate. So as a result, the air here is very dry air. And the same thing happens on this side. So if from the equator the clouds move south towards the Tropic of Capricorn, the same process happens again. So the cool, dry air sinks, and as it sinks and moves closer to the ground, to the surface, it warms up, so it becomes warm, dry air. And that is why near the tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, we have very hot and dry weather, which are associated with deserts, and that is why near the equator we have very, very hot and wet weather associated with tropical rainforests. So you might, on your diagram, want to draw some sort of cacti. And then you might want to, near the equator, draw some really thick green trees to show that it's very hot and wet there, so lots of trees can grow. Whereas near the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, because it's very hot and dry, we only have plants like the cacti that grow there. I hope this helps you when you complete your tasks 2, 3 and 4, and please make sure to re-watch the video if you are struggling. Have fun, good luck and enjoy your geography work.